Hi everyone and welcome to this new class in classification of aircraft. In this case we will be discussing military aircraft. Okay, so the purposes of military aircraft, as you may imagine, are basically war, right? So this would imply, for instance, destroying any kind of equipment of the enemy. How can you do this? Well, you have a fighter aircraft which actually fight against other aircraft. You have bomber aircraft to set bombs to specific targets, attack aircraft which are kind of a combination of the both of above. You also have military transport aircraft, as you can imagine, and one of the most interesting also is the spy aircraft, which were developed especially in the Cold War, and this kind of aircraft were actually oriented to avoiding any kind of detection from the radars of the enemy. Okay. So, in terms of history of military aircraft, you go back to 1909. Okay, so actually the Wright brothers, which are, as you may know, are the creators or the developers of the first propelled aircraft. Okay, actually developed already a Wright Model A, which was kind of military focused. Okay, so as you may know and as you can imagine, the story of aircraft is very, very linked to military aircraft. Okay, in this case, this aircraft, which was the first one, was capable of 64 kilometers per hour with 2 people on board. Okay, and it could have a range of up to 200 kilometers. Okay, so quite an interesting first airplane, considering it was back in 1909. So basically the beginning. I think the first tests for the Wright brothers aircraft were in 1905 or something like that. And as you can see, as 1909 it was kind of operational. Okay, just with some modifications of course, but it was kind of a good start for military aircraft. Okay. As you can imagine, for World War I and World War II, aviation had a lot of important advances. Okay. Here you have the World War I typical biplanes, okay, which were based especially on wood, were developed and were constructed based on wood, because wood was kind of a lightweight material in the time. You can imagine that having a Boeing or an Airbus right now made of wood would probably not be the best idea, okay, for the properties of the wood, of course. And as you can see, the idea is that it is typical in the World War I that actually planes that had this kind of biplane configuration, as you can see, which is kind of interesting because basically the idea was that the motors, the engines that they had, were not powerful enough to provide very high speeds. And as we will see in the aerodynamic part, it was essential to have very high speeds, okay? So the idea is, if you have low speed, then you need more surface, okay, so that you can provide a lift, and therefore the aircraft can actually fly. So this was the idea, okay, for World War I. The engines were not powerful enough, so they needed more surface. What happened in World War II? Well, the idea is that especially the metallic structures were introduced, and metallic structures, you may understand that may be heavier, okay, than wood, but the structures were more solid, so in the end you needed less material, okay, so less weight in the end. And of course it had better properties, okay, it had more strength, it resisted more loads, and therefore you could just develop one wing plane with completely different configuration. This is kind of elliptic, okay, this is the elliptic of the Spitfire, which is very well known, and as you can see, this compares completely different to the first model, okay, of a typical biplane of the First World War. Alright, as you can see also, the motors, the engines that were used in World War II were just very, very more powerful than the ones used for World War I. So this is why you have this kind of aircraft, which kind of resembles more common aircraft that you would have right now. Okay. So here you have several designs of military aircraft. It's quite interesting to note that the first one is a spy one. I think it's one from the United States. This kind of course, this kind of aircraft was something very experimental. You couldn't apply this to any other thing than just for spy or military operations, okay? It was a bomber also. Here you have, I think this is a Su-35. It was one of the most iconic aircraft regarding the Russian Air Force, okay? It is really capable, as you can imagine. The materials are very strong. They can resist very high loads, and therefore you have simply a very good aircraft. Okay, you also have the typical Eurofighter Typhoon Eurofighter, which is the one used for NATO, especially in Europe. Okay, and there are some more aircraft. As you can see, this is a bit different. This is not a fighter. This is not an attack aircraft, but rather a bomber and kind of a aircraft which can be used for transport means. Okay, so this would be all regarding military aircraft. As you can see, you have different kinds of aircraft depending on the kind of operation and performance that you need.